Okay, good morning again. I'm sorry I meant to get on here a little earlier, but here we are now, and I'm going to continue reading my wife's story from her book, from a Spacious Place. This is part two of the short story, Freedom's Paradox. Uh, Last time, the character was in a recurring nightmare where her car crashes into a concrete barrier, and then this time the dream stopped for some reason, and she ended up meeting Jesus. And now they're talking about the difference between freedom and restriction and the relationship between the two. And they just came to a pond and are continuing the conversation. Let's see here. So Jesus just said, "I'm not the one arguing for restrictions and freedom in inverse proportions." Then I'm confused. What are you suggesting? Well, I was merely responding to your objection that I can't link freedom and restrictions. You were arguing for freedom as the absence of restrictions. Freedom is not nearly that simple, as you've discovered. I have? Well, can you really argue that freedom equals lack of all restrictions? I suppose not all, I said, thinking that I could have argued for the absence of most. Think about a traffic light. If it's always green in all four directions, what do you get? I grimaced. An accident at worst, really slow traffic at best. So are all people more likely to get to their destination with or without both red and green traffic lights? With, I said, forced to agree despite myself. Next time I had to remember not to begin my argument with a universal statement. Okay, so you've convinced me that freedom is not the absence of all restrictions. I'll give you that they can be useful occasionally. Then let's go back to the emotional level. Why don't you like to be restricted? Bad experiences, probably. Too many people who restricted me right into a ditch, or maybe a concrete barrier, I said with a shaky smile. He put a gentle hand on my knee. It sounds like it comes down to a trust issue. You don't want just any old restrictions. You want the right ones. Those that will help you, that will increase your freedom to experience things you really want. Yet you don't trust anyone but yourself to decide which restrictions fall into that category. Is that what you're saying? Right. Who else is going to know what will make me happy? I can run my own life better than anyone else. Can you? How can you know which restrictions will fulfill that category? How can you even know that you'll ever be happy? I cocked my head to the side. Never be happy. I suppose by trial and error, though I can also learn from other people's mistakes. And doesn't everyone know what happiness is? Don't you think people spend a lot of time chasing it as if they couldn't pin it down like a half-remembered scent? Maybe, but just because it's hard to get doesn't mean you shouldn't look. Don't you think it's easier to find water in a desert or at a spring? I would generally go with the spring, I said. Why are we suddenly talking about water? So if people are trying to find happiness in a desert, when there's a spring available, is all their hard work worth it? I never thought about it. If happiness were readily available elsewhere, I suppose their efforts would be categorized as foolish, heartbreaking, he said, his voice full of sorrow and anger. I leaned forward. Where is this spring? He shook his head and smiled. Let's start at the beginning. What is happiness? I racked my brain. Why are the most basic ideas often the hardest to define? A feeling when all seems as it should be, like when your spirit lifts because the day was gray and now the sun is shining, or when you have a sudden blissful moment of perfect understanding with someone you love. Moments when you want to sing and dance or be still because everything is so beautiful and perfect. It's hard to explain. How would you define it? I would say happiness comes in those moments when you're in line with the way we design the world to work. It's the sense of being the person you were created to be, in the circumstances you were created to thrive in. I'd never thought of it that way. I know, he said dryly. No wonder it's elusive. Even if I could get myself where I needed to be, there's no way I could make everything and everyone else cooperate. Is happiness even possible? I asked. Of course it is, though as you've alluded to, it's less common in the broken world and impossible to attain if it is the goal. What? Impossible to obtain if it's the goal? I'm not sure I agree with that. I've been happy. I mean, that's what got me involved in the church in the first place. It is? Or is it? He asked. His gaze sliced through me once again, laying bare my motives so that I could examine them myself. I had begun my spiritual journey out of hunger for significance. I had stayed in the church because I thought it made me happy. But had it really? The more I thought about it, the more I kept coming back to guilt. Attending church gave me a bone to throw at my gnawing sense of guilt whenever it raised its wolfish head. I'm not saying that being in my body can't make you happy, he said gently. We created you to be in relationships. As you experience healthy relationships with the church, happiness is a byproduct. But is that really why you go to church? I looked down at the ground. I suppose not. I guess I've been going because it makes me feel less guilty, though I did enjoy my friends. Just keep that in mind, he said. Hang on one moment. Just figured I'd turn my phone down. Just keep that in mind, he said, asking me to do the thing I least desired to do at that moment. I nodded. Then, determined to move the conversation along, I asked, So, what did you mean when you said happiness is impossible if it's the goal? Once happiness becomes an end in itself, you've divorced it from us. Okay, what was I missing? If happiness is a byproduct of living the way we designed you to be, and we designed you first and foremost to be in a right relationship with us, why do you think it's possible to find happiness elsewhere? How do you expect to act in line with the design specifications when you refuse to talk to the designer or read the manual? I see what you mean, but still, some people catch hold of happiness in bits. Why else would they work so hard to find it? Jesus pointed at the dancing shadows on my rock. For some, the bits they catch are only shadows, not happiness itself. Like Plato's shadows, those bits only emphasize their longing for the substance. Others seek it because of the moments when everything in them cries out in despair. This is not the way things ought to be. Happiness apart from us is all in glimmers and counterfeits rather than substance. Full happiness is yet to come, revealed in the day when we set all to rights. So, what do happiness and freedom have to do with each other? I asked. What do freedom and restrictions have to do with one another? Some restrictions can free you, I began, like a bored student parroting back a set of half-grasped words. Then understanding came in a blinding flash. I sat stock still, amazed. You're talking about things like music lessons or physical training, aren't you? If you restrict yourself by practicing or training, it actually opens up new possibilities. It creates freedom to do things you wouldn't otherwise be able to accomplish. Yes. But then not all restrictions free you, I added, thinking back to injustices like slavery, which were often within the realm of legality. Right, think about physical training. Suppose a person training to fly like a bird, using only his body. He could spend his life strengthening his muscles and studying birds, but would those restrictions help him achieve his goal? Oh, Haley there, Stephanie. I lost my place. No, I snickered. then realized I'd done things that were likely just as foolish. As would and would his life be fulfilling, or would it be wasted? Wasted. Do you see that this person is less himself? The wrong restrictions dehumanize you. So, as you were saying, not all of them are freeing. I ground my teeth. And now I suppose we're back to how to determine which ones are freeing and which ones suck the life out of you. I didn't want to talk about it. Jesus smiled at me. There are fish in this pond. I blinked at him a few times, then decided to just go with it. Yes, there are, I said, noting the many ripples disturbing the water's surface. The fish were in a feeding frenzy. Do you suppose the fish know they need water? He asked, idly, slipping his fingers into the pond. I have no idea. He stood up and held out a hand. Let's go find out. I gulped. Okay, sure. I took his hand. I began to shrivel and shrink. It was an unpleasant sensation, like being squished into a box much too small. Then all at once, I was a fish, out of water. It was exceedingly uncomfortable. I flopped about, my gills gasping for water, until Jesus unceremoniously plopped me into the pond. I gulped deep breaths of water. Much better. What in the world was all that near suffocation about? I swam a bit and was delighted to discover how well my new fins and tail worked. Jesus dove in after me, now a fish himself. So, what do you think? If I'm going to be a fish, I prefer to be a fish in the water rather than out, I said primly. Why is that? Fish are not designed to breathe air. I slashed a fin downward, trying to emphasize my point, but mostly just flailing. So? They can't function well without water. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, the vast majority of fish can't survive outside it. Ah, I see you found another freedom-enhancing restriction. I didn't have anything to say to that. I floated there, my mouth opening and closing repeatedly, as I cast about for a suitable reply. None came to mind. My only hope was that I just looked fishy, not ridiculous. All right, I need to stop there for this morning. Thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying the story. Again, a link to the book is in the description. If you want to check it out, it's available on Amazon. It's called Tales from a Spacious Place by Elizabeth Frerichs. Talk to you guys later. So long.